So this is the tale of my first foray into the game of Dungeons & Dragons, and how we as a party made our Dungeon Master quit. For some context, this was the first D&D game my friends and I played, back in the days when Critical Role was just one of many shows on Geek & Sundry, and Stranger Things had yet to explode D&D into the modern cultural zeitgeist. Back in college, a friend of mine asked if I wanted to join his D&D game. Now, I was only vaguely aware of the game at the time, but I thought it was something that big sweaty nerds played in their parents' basements. And as a big sweaty nerd myself, I was, as the kids say, down to clown. But there were a few warning signs in our D&D group. So, when you play D&D for the first time, I've heard it compared to being like a child. You're testing boundaries, figuring out what you can and cannot do, acting without really any thought to the consequences of your actions. None of us had any role-playing or improv experience, but what we did have was video game experience, which we all know translates super well into tabletop RPGs. Not to mention, this was also our DM's first time running a campaign, and he didn't really know how to guide the players or how to say no. Now, while none of these are really that big of red flags, they could be seen more as yellow warning signs that we should have talked more about before we played our first game. But this being our first game ever, none of us did. Anyway, let's jump to everyone's favorite D&D topic, characters. Now, the first actual red flag that anyone who's played D&D for any amount of time would have seen was our characters. Let me introduce to you my first D&D character, Genghis Gorehorn. Genghis Gorehorn is a half-orc fighter. A former slave and gladiator, Genghis fought in the fight pits to gain his freedom, and now works as a chaotic neutral mercenary who only cares about money and himself. Now, in my humble opinion, this is a fine character. In a regular adventuring party, Genghis would be the gruff Hulk or Grog type character who isn't as morally good as the others in their team, and is more willing to do the morally repugnant things when needed. And unfortunately for us, Genghis here was the moral compass of our party. Not to mention I probably played him more as chaotic evil than chaotic neutral, but hey, first time player. Now let me introduce the other characters. After Genghis, we have Melchior, who was a necromancer whose player disappeared after the first session, so he isn't really relevant. Next up, we have Valentine the Fighter. Valentine is a heroic, lawful good knight, dedicated to the tenets of chivalry and protecting the people of the land. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kevin, why was Genghis the moral compass of the party when Valentine was there? Shouldn't Valentine be the leader? Well, normally, yes, you'd be right. But unfortunately for us, Valentine's player talked with the DM and said he wanted his character to have a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde style multiple personalities. And the DM said sure. And like before, this is not a bad idea per se. But the other personality was literally Darth Sidious. A pure, chaotic evil bastard of a character who wouldn't flinch when kicking puppies, stealing candy from children, and committing war crimes. And believe it or not, Evil Valentine was not the worst member of our party. Let me introduce the last member of our merry band of murder hobos and miscreants, SVU-74. SVU is a Soviet killbot who was teleported to our fantasy world through unknown plot shenanigans. We played him as a Warforged ranger, and in his backstory, he fought against the Chechens. So that should give you a hint as to his morality. With introductions out of the way, let's get on to the meat of this story, the adventure itself. So, Our adventure starts off like any good story, in a small village tavern. Here, we get hired by the locals to clear out a small ruin which had become the home of a tribe of goblins that were raiding the village. Simple level 1 stuff. And we cleared out that dungeon like the badass group of adventuring mercenaries we were. Genghis and Valentine did butt heads a lot, but we worked together and began squishing goblins left and right. Genghis got to break a bugbear's back over his knee, Bane style, while Valentine went toe-to-toe with a freshly hatched black dragon and cut off its head. All in all, the adventure was working out pretty well. That is, until we got to the goblin quarters. Now, people who have been playing D&D for a while should know some variation of the goblin baby twist. You go in, killing a bunch of goblin mooks, but lo and behold, there's a room of goblin babies left over. And the players are left with the moral quandary of what to do with all these orphans. Now, not going into the whole issue of whether or not these goblins were just a naturally evil, semi-sentient race that can only be such because they were created by an evil god who forces them to be evil, or if these goblins were a race that just had the unfortunate circumstances of not being as technologically advanced as the other races, and were now forced into a culture of raiding and violence, and had the capability of being better. Because we as a party did not care. Both Genghis and SVU did not have any compunctions against killing goblin children. Melchior was gone, and unfortunately, the only person who would have cared, Valentine, was currently in Palpatine mode. So, the encounter went something like this. So, we were hired to kill all of the goblins in this dungeon, right? Da, comrade. Yes. Yes. Well, a job's a job, and I still see goblins here. Sorry, kiddos. Now, let me say, we went to fucking town on these goblin children. We committed war crimes in that room that would make Stalin proud. We went full fucking goblin slayer. By the time we got here, we were level 3, so Valentine was an eldritch knight and was force lightning kids with shocking grasp. Meanwhile, SVU was taking trophies. All honesty, Genghis was the most merciful out of the party, out of the sheer fact that he was killing them quickly. In what was, I assume, an attempt to salvage the situation, the DM had Valentine switch to lawful good mode during this massacre. But by that point, there was only one child left. Valentine, now a Jedi again, is horrified by what's going on and wants to save the last child. Unfortunately, none of us are clerics, and we used up most of our healing potions crawling our way through this dungeon. And doubly unfortunately for Valentine, the only person who had a potion was me, and Genghis had been developing a dislike and rivalry with Valentine throughout the whole campaign. Here's how their interaction went. Genghis, please, give me the potion to save the child's life. What? No. I paid for this. It's mine. Really, Genghis? Now is the time you wish to be greedy? When a child's life is on the line? Hey, buddy. This was the only potion I could buy because you cleared out the merchants. Not my problem your weak human body needed more healing than mine. Damn it, Genghis, you monster! Here, I'll pay you back for it. 25 gold pieces. 50. You're upcharging me! I have the supply, you have the demand. So I set the price. Fine. So, yeah, that's about how we ended our third session. We wrapped up and went home, and when we tried to schedule our next session, the DM said he wasn't really feeling the campaign, so we ended it there. Yeah, not great. But if there's anything I would say I learned from my first misadventure into Dungeons & Dragons, it was a lesson that every player and group should learn, which is about communication and expectations. Our DM, even though it was his first time DMing, had more experience in D&D and was expecting a more traditional, heroic adventure, which was probably a little influenced by Critical Role, which again was smaller at the time and the rest of us hadn't seen. Meanwhile, the rest of us were expecting a more video game-like RPG, where typically your options are kill first and ask questions later, and the moral consequences of what you do really don't matter. Think going on a GTA rampage or quick saving in Skyrim before you murder a whole village. Because of this, we thought we were going to go hack and slash our way through dungeons to get loot and money. And neither way is a right or wrong way to play Dungeons & Dragons, because there is no right or wrong way to play Dungeons & Dragons. It was just two different ways to play that, unfortunately, we as a group did not discuss beforehand. Our DM wanted a party of mostly good adventurers who would go on to save the kingdom, and unfortunately didn't communicate that desire to us. Nor did he say no when we brought up our insane, evil characters to him because he didn't want to restrict our freedom. And sure, D&D is all about player choice, agency, and having fun, but as players, we never thought to check with the DM about what kind of party or campaign he wanted. So yeah, all in all, it was a strange first introduction into the world of Dungeons & Dragons that ultimately didn't work out. Who knows, maybe if we talked about our expectations and desires for the campaign going in, we would have had a years-long campaign where we fought Tiamat for the fate of the world. But that's just how things turn out. However, at the end of the day, it was still a good lesson, we all stayed friends after, and this actually gave me the experience I needed to start running my own campaign. Which also crashed and burned, but more on that later. Hey guys, I know I usually don't add something like this at the end of my videos, but since this project was way more work than my usual book excerpts or comic dubs, I wanted to say that if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please like, comment, and subscribe. I more or less need to know if working on videos this long is worth it. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.